Hi grade 12s and welcome to another episode of Geography. Today we're dealing with settlement geography, and yes, it's people and places. Let's look at some of the content that you have to know for this particular section. Looking at it, the broad heading is people and places, processes and spatial patterns. Remember that in order to understand this section, we have to understand it in a geographical perspective. When we're dealing with geography, the content deals with spatial aspects as well as processes that influence these spatial aspects. Looking at the content and key concepts that need to be understood in this section will be highlighted as follows. The first aspects deal with site and situation. Remember, in order to understand spatial aspects of a settlement, we need to know the exact location of a specific settlement, which is referred to as its site, as well as that settlement in relation to the surrounding area, which refers to its situation. Remember, site, exact piece of land, and situation, the relationship of that particular settlement to the surrounding areas. Other content which we have to understand in this section is as follows. The differences between dispersed and nucleated settlements. In this example, we look at how settlements are shaped and spread across a particular land surface. When it's dispersed, a good word to remember is spread out. And when it's nucleated, it is closely packed together. Moving on, we further look at wet point and dry point settlements. These are the influences of water across different types of settlements. The two types are dry point and wet point. One of the most important aspects in understanding a settlement is in terms of its functions. Functions can deal with different types of needs within a settlement. For example, the high order and low order functions. A high order function could be services rendered, for example, hospitals in a settlement. A low order function could be your corner shop, example, selling bread. So when we're looking at functions, we will be looking at the differences between high order and low order functions. Characteristics of settlements. Here we look at different types of settlements in terms of their morphology. Morphology deals with shape and form of a settlement. Here we're looking specifically at what factors influence the way a settlement is located around a specific area. Moving on, the relationship between the population and dwelling. Here, a specific number of people located in a specific area and the way their settlements are formed. Let's start off with the basic concept of settlement. A simple definition to understand settlement will be as follows. A settlement is a place where a group of people live together and function together. So in terms of this, the two keywords we need to highlight is as follows. Group of people and function. When we bring these two concepts together, a grouping of people and the functions that surround them, we create a settlement. Remember, settlements are classified as follows. There are two types of settlements, urban settlements and rural settlements. And this distinction is placed according to the processes that influence this type of settlement. So, according to their size, according to their activities, these are two factors that influence whether a settlement is a rural settlement or an urban settlement. Let's look more closely now at the definition of a rural settlement and an urban settlement. The key aspect of understanding settlement geography is identifying the keywords within the definition that help us better remember what we need to know for that concept or term. In this case, the first term we're going to look at is rural settlements. The key words to identify, as I'll read the sentence to you, is as follows. Rural settlements are usually quite small. Most people living there are involved in primary activities. Primary activities is your key word in understanding this concept, such as farming, fishing, forestry, or mining. Rural settlements are therefore unifunctional, meaning one type of function, and therefore are associated with primary activities. In order to understand the concept, the key words for rural settlements is as follows: primary activities and unifunctional. Generally, this question is for 2 marks, and the 2 ticks that are associated with this particular definition are located as follows: 1 for primary and 1 for unifunctional. And if you want to go further, your examples of unifunctional activities are farming, fishing, and forestry. Let's move on to urban settlements. In terms of urban settlements, you need to know the following. An urban settlement, as opposed to a rural settlement, is therefore associated with secondary and tertiary activities. Let's think of some examples. Remember, any secondary activity in an economy deals with the manufacturing and processing of raw materials. So in order for primary activities, in order for urban settlements to occur, rural settlements need to perform their unifunctional activities of forestry, mining, and fishing. Once these activities are performed in a rural settlement, an urban settlement then processes these raw materials. Secondary activities. Tertiary activities deals with the services provided in order to manufacture the secondary products. Another important word is, therefore, these settlements are multifunctional. So, keywords to remember for the following concepts: rural settlements, primary activities, and therefore unifunctional. Urban settlements, secondary and tertiary activities, and therefore multifunctional. Easy stuff. Now let's look at settlements in terms of what we need to know in terms of the processes that influence urban and rural settlements. It is important to know the difference between site and situation of a settlement. When we refer to the site of a settlement, we are referring to the actual piece of land settled on, the physical characteristics of that piece of land. Physical characteristics deals with relief, for example, how flat or steep that land is. When we're looking at factors influencing the site of the situation, remember these are physical factors, so therefore they'll deal with the natural processes around that settlement. For example, availability of water. Are there sufficient rivers and streams around that particular settlement? Arable land. Is the land fertile enough to perform the primary activity? Example, farming. Grazing land. Again, farming. Building materials and level ground. So for this particular section, remember, there are 2 types of settlements when it comes to rural and urban settlements. And the factors that influence them are the site and situation of these settlements. A closer look at the site of a settlement refers to the actual piece of land settled on. Let's take a closer look now at situation. It is important to know that situation deals with a key concept of relation or relationship. The position of a settlement in relation to the surrounding environment. Here we're not referring to the physical factors, but rather the social and economic factors that influence the location of the settlement. For example, we can consider the following aspects: transportation routes, the general relief in terms of how the land is manipulated, slope aspects, and soil fertility. When the site and situation, customs and traditions are combined, we find that some areas tend to be nucleated whilst others are dispersed. Upon understanding the site and situation of settlements, we begin to understand that these factors influence the way a settlement is shaped. For example, nucleation and dispersion, or nucleated and dispersed. When we refer to nucleation, we are referring to how closely compacted the dwellings are built. When we refer to dispersed, how spread out these particular buildings occur. So, in a brief summary, and this is good, especially for study methods, where we provide you with a tabulated format of what we've discussed. Remember, water is freely available in a dispersed settlement, and a nucleated settlement, it is in short supply. Reason being, people are more compacted in a nucleated settlement, and therefore there is a competition and a greater demand for the water. Moving on, if we look at relief, dispersed settlements are generally spread out due to factors of flat land, whereas on nucleated settlements, it's generally associated with steeper or more high-lying areas. Soil, fertile in dispersed, unfertile in dispersed as well as fertile in nucleated. When it comes to traditions of settlements, we look specifically at specific cultural beliefs of different types of settlements in our country, and each particular culture within its own traditions lives in a certain way. These are factors of situation of a settlement. For example, Nguni settlements and Tswana settlements, they shape their settlements according to traditions. Defense purposes, example, war and violence, settlements generally tend to nucleate themselves in order to provide a better defense mechanism. Now let's look at wet point and dry point settlements. Looking closely at the definition, where there is water in a dry area, example a spring oasis, if water is scarce, people gather around a wet point. Generally, your wet point settlements will occur in drier areas, example your Kalahari regions. Here, when a settlement locates closely around a water source, it is referred to as a wet point settlement. A dry point settlement is where there is a dry point in a wet area. People settle on dry land, example small hills suitable for settlements in marshy areas. Here, it is worth noting that where water serves as a threat. Generally, informal settlements that are located close to rivers are at threat. So we say these particular dwellings are moved further away from the river. When water serves as a threat, it becomes a dry point settlement. Let's now look closely at characteristics of settlements. The first factor that influences the characteristics of a settlement is its size. The size refers to the number of people living together. This can vary from the smallest isolated farmstead to a small hamlet. Here, we are talking to different classifications of settlements, to a village that may consist of a few hundred inhabitants. The size also referred to as a hierarchy of settlements. There's a key word for us to understand. Hierarchy deals with specifically the ordering of settlements. Generally, a hierarchy deals with the numbers of people living in the particular settlement. Ensure that you know that there are characteristics and South African examples. What follows is an example of a settlement hierarchy. This is very important to understand. In order for us to understand the settlement hierarchy, we will note that a triangle is used. When we look specifically at this particular triangle, it refers to the size of that settlement. So what you should note is the single isolated farmstead occupies a larger size in terms of area, whilst your megalopolis occupies a smaller area. Although what we should note is the following. As you move up the settlement hierarchy, the number of functions increases. So the largest of all settlements in terms of functions is a megalopolis. The smallest in terms of functions is a farmstead. A farmstead therefore becomes a rural settlement. When many isolated farmsteads group together, they form rural hamlets. Many rural hamlets together forms villages. A village is the largest type of rural settlements. Now, once you reach this area of your settlement hierarchy, we refer to these as your urban settlements. Note the nature and amount of functions for a particular settlement in terms of urban increases. a town, a city, for example, a city like Cape Town, and Durban. A metropolis deals with those settlements that form together from many cities. The best example of a conurbation is the Witwatersrand area. The Witwatersrand incorporates Johannesburg with its surrounding urban centers. And a megalopolis, unfortunately in South Africa, we do not have a clear example of a megalopolis. These are found in major metropolitan urban areas in Japan, for example, Tokyo, and in the United States, for example, New York. Let's look further at characteristics. Remember, our first factor was size. Now we're dealing with pattern. Settlements that are far apart are isolated or dispersed. Note the key words again: far apart, isolated, and dispersed. Settlements that are close together to each other are clustered or nucleated. Let's look closely now at advantages of living in a dispersed settlement. Farmers can generally make their own decisions because these types of farmers are generally regarded as commercial farmers. They can mechanize and implement environmentally friendly farming methods. Mechanization refers to the ability of a farmer to use more technological aspects on his farms. If we look at nucleated settlements in terms of advantages, help is readily available in terms of trouble, health emergencies, and war. Farmers need less capital, seeing that they can borrow machines and other implements from each other. Remember, nucleation refers to the close grouping of individuals in a settlement. Therefore, there is a greater amount of employment in a nucleated settlement. On a dispersed settlement, these require vast expanses of land in order to practice these types of farming. Let's now look closely at the next factor, shape. Another word for shape that you should know is the morphology of a settlement. Morphology deals with the shape of a settlement. Another term used to describe the shape of the settlement is morphology of the settlement. This refers to how the buildings are arranged in relation to each other and their physical appearance. Note the following: relationship, situation, correct, and physical appearance, site. These two factors influence the shape. When we refer to the shapes of settlements, they generally are influenced in terms of the following. Linear. These are the settlements that occur either along a road or a railway line. Settlements, in terms of dwellings, generally occur along a linear feature. A round settlement. This could be a settlement that is located near a water source. Settlements are generally surrounding that water source. A square-shaped settlement, generally a square feature around which settlements are generally built. Again, influencing shapes. Some settlements generally occur along a crossroad. These types of settlements are generally located in order to have accessibility to major roads. Again, the shape of the settlement is a crossroad shape, influenced by the shaping of a road. A T-shaped settlement, generally the dwellings would be located in the form of a T. These various shapes and forms of settlements influence the way a settlement is located. The above are the most common shapes, but it is crucial to know how the shapes are developed. When we're looking at this particular aspect, it is important to look at, especially in your exams, what are the factors influencing that shape of settlement. The relationship between population and dwellings. In grade 11, you learned that demography is the branch of human geography that studies human populations. Demography is simply another term to describe population or the study thereof. It looks at changes in human population numbers, for example, birth rates and death rates. Patterns of human distribution, let's get those keywords in, and how they change over time. Population differences between age and sex classes, whether they are more males or females. You will see that settlement geography tends to focus on people's dwellings rather than on people. This is because dwellings provide clues about how, where, and why. How, where, and why their inhabitants settled, where they did, and how settlements have changed over time. The best examples to look at is South African examples, where we clearly understand the legacies of which policies determined how, where, and why people live. In spite of the different approaches, settlement geography has much in common with demography. Settlement geography and demography provide useful data, example, statistics, and other information that both branches can use. So, settlement geography provides a framework in which we can understand how populations across different parts of the world are spread. More importantly, populations on a South African context are spread. And that rounds up our basic understanding of what we need to know in terms of the terms associated in settlement geography. I think we deserve a ad break. Let's take a break, guys. Welcome back, guys. Hope you enjoyed that break. Continuing with settlement geography. Now let's look at specifically some hints and tips which you can remember in order to answer these questions. Hint number 1. In the final examination, 20 to 30% of the settlement questions will be about the rural settlements. Let's highlight that. 20 to 30% on rural settlements, with urban settlements making up the balance of that question. Expect to be examined on some settlement work in map work examination. This forms part of the integration of paper 1 with paper 2. Hint 3. Photographs, sketches, maps, advertisements, and statistical data can also be expected in this section. Hint 4. Make sure you know key concepts and terminology and are able to apply this knowledge to new situations. In order to best answer this question, remember, you have to be able to integrate your knowledge of both the physical aspects of geography and map work into settlement geography. This provides you with a framework of understanding of settlement geography. Now, let's move on to some questioning and examples of past year papers that will help us better understand settlement geography. The first question we deal with is the types of questions you would get as multiple choice questions, answering and selecting from column A and B, as well as selecting the suitable term. In this particular example, 4 options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose and write only the answer A to D. Let's move to the first question. The smallest settlement type, rural settlement type, is A, hamlet, isolated farmstead, low order service, or village. Remember our settlement hierarchy? Yes, an isolated farmstead is the best example of the smallest settlement type. Moving on to question 2. A settlement is classified as rural as a result of the option A, number of people living in the settlement, size of the settlement, function of the settlement, number of low order activities performed by the settlement. In this example, remember your keywords. And if you note, the function of the rural settlement is what's important. In this example, we refer to your primary activities and therefore unifunctional. Correct answer is C. Moving on to 1.3. Site is influenced by the following factors: water, relief aspect, water defense, relief fuel, water topography, altitude aspect, historical circumstances, water, and farmland. You will note the following. Option D has social aspects attached to it. Option C is a possibility. However, topography allows it to be a situation factor. In option B, defense is your situation factor, which rules it out. The correct option is A, which deals with all physical factors. Example, water, relief, and aspects. 113, your correct answer is A. Let's look at 1.1.4. Dry point settlements occur near A, deserts, B, oasis, C, marshes, D, higher ground. In this example, marshes would serve as a threat, so therefore the dry point settlement option would be C. Moving on to 1.5. Agriculture is an example of a what type of economic activity? There are 4 types of economic activities. It cannot be quaternary because these are activities that deal with technological aspects. Tertiary cannot be tertiary because it deals with services, correct. C, manufacturing, no. The correct answer in this example is D. Agriculture is an example of a primary economic activity. Let's move on now to question 2. Question 2. Refer to the map below showing an area in the southern hemisphere. Note the examiner is referring specifically to the southern hemisphere, outside the tropics, and answer the questions that follow. These are useful hints and tips in the question that will provide you with a framework for the types of questions that will be asked. Let's look at the map before attempting the questions. In this map, we refer to these little dots as settlements. If you note the key at the bottom, these are farmsteads. And these farmsteads, noting the discussions we've had earlier, in terms of A, are dispersed. In terms of B, are grouped closely together, therefore nucleated. You will also note that there is a feature along which this settlement is located. And if we look further into the key, you've got a farm boundary. Notice your farm boundaries, your road, which is actually this particular feature, and your water source, which is located at settlement D. In this map, we have settlement A, which already we can see is dispersed and divided by the farm boundaries. Settlement B, which is nucleated. However, both settlements are linear settlements. So in this example, you have a linear dispersed settlement and a linear nucleated settlement. Here, you have a circular settlement, which is located around a water source, settlement D. If we go further into this diagram, you will note that there is no specific ordering in this particular arrangement of farmsteads at C. When we look at E, your settlement is located on a slope. Note the slopes are referred to with regards to the contour lines. Let's move into the questions. Match each of the settlements represented by letters A to D, respectively, with one of the following distributions. The first one refers to a random dispersed settlement. That would be settlement E, because settlement E is a dispersed settlement from the rest of the settlements. Settlement E. Linear nucleation. If we look at this particular settlement, it's located along a road. Settlement B is nucleated, and there's your road feature. So linear nucleated would be settlement B. Linear dispersed. Going back to your diagram, you'll note that the farmsteads in A are quite well spread out. Therefore, your linear dispersed is settlement A. Haphazard nucleation. If we look specifically at C, there is no particular shape or form of the settlement. So we refer to it as a haphazard settlement. Again, settlement C. And circular cluster. This particular settlement represents a circular cluster which is located around a water source. In this example, it is D. So let's go over that again. Settlement E, or a farmstead, which is dispersed from other settlements, is therefore referred to as a random dispersed settlement. You'll note that E generally occurs randomly, whereas settlement B is a linear nucleated settlement which is located along a road. Settlement A, dispersed settlement, however, still occurring along a linear feature. Settlement D is located in the shape of a circle and around a water source, and therefore becomes a circular cluster. For each of these, you'd get a full 2 marks, which would give you a total of 8. Moving on to the next question. Question 2, continuing, 2.2. For each settlements A and B, state and explain the factor that might have influenced its morphology. Remember, morphology is another word for shape. In this example, settlement A has already been referred to as a linear dispersed settlement. Settlement B has already been referred to as a nucleated settlement, linear nucleated. In this example, when we refer to settlement B, we should note the following. The shape of settlement B is influenced by the road. Note the road is located along settlement B, and therefore the factor that has influenced its shape, settlement B, is the road. In terms of settlement A, the feature referred to is the river. In this example, the river has influenced the way the farm boundaries have been located and divide each of these settlements. Therefore, settlement B, the answer would be the river. Moving on to the next question. Still dealing with the map. 2.3. Is settlement E a wet or a dry settlement? Give a reason for your answer. Looking at settlement E, you should note the following. It is located on a slope. Note the contour lines are much closer together. When contour lines are of this nature, we say that the slope is steep. Note, this settlement has located away from the river. Therefore, water would serve as a threat. In this example, settlement E therefore becomes a dry point settlement. And remember, the river influences let's get that right, influences its location as it serves as a threat. Moving on to the next question. The next question, state one advantage that settlement B has over settlement A. We've already referred to settlement B as being a nucleated linear settlement and settlement B as a dispersed settlement. Again, linear dispersed, linear nucleated. What advantages are there that settlement B has over settlement A? In this example, settlement B would have more security. Settlement B would also have a sharing of ideas, whereas settlement A, each farmstead is far apart. Remember, when settlements are nucleated close to each other, they share ideas and decisions. In settlements A, the farmers are generally supposed to make their own decisions, which could be harmful or positive. Settlement B has an advantage over settlement A due to the close groupings of the farmsteads and decision making, as well as sharing ideas. Moving on to the next question. State and explain the climatic factor that could have been responsible for the location of settlement C. Note the following. Settlement C is located on the slope. Go back to the question, and the examiners have referred to the southern hemisphere and outside the tropics. That simply means, and if we have to add to it, that this becomes your north-facing slope. And this slope is your south-facing slope. Remember, this diagram represents an area in the southern hemisphere. Above this slope, you have a north-facing slope which faces that way and faces the direct rays of the sun, whereas the south-facing slope receives the oblique rays of the sun. Therefore, settlement C is located on a warmer slope. State and explain the climatic factor that could have been responsible for the location of settlement C. Your correct answer is aspect of slope. Simply put, in the southern hemisphere, the north-facing slopes receive the direct rays of the sun. In the southern hemisphere, the south-facing slopes receive the indirect rays of the sun. Moving on. Moving to the next question. Match the geographical term with the correct definition. Write down only the question number and the correct answer. Geographical terms of site, secondary sector, megalopolis, conurbation, and metropolis. Remember, when we're answering these questions, we've got to keep in mind that there are keywords associated with these definitions, as we've discussed earlier. For example, when it comes to site, we should be looking for the words exact or specific. If we look at our options given, option B, the exact ground or area on which a settlement is built. Question 3.1, your correct answer is B. Moving on to 3.2, secondary sector. Immediately, we should note that secondary deals with manufacturing and processing of raw material. I should be looking for those key aspects. If I look at option C, economic activities producing goods using raw materials. Note the following: economic activities producing. The production sector deals with secondary activities. Your correct answer for 3.2 is C, megalopolis. Remember your settlement hierarchy? Of all settlements, the megalopolis was the largest. Another word for largest, gigantic. A gigantic urban complex resulting from the coalescence or joining together of several conurbations and large cities. The answer for 3.3 is A. Moving on to conurbation, which is 3.4. The key word for conurbation is coalescence or joining together of several individual towns and cities. In this example, conurbation would be associated with the definition given by E. And therefore, the last factor, the main city of a region often surrounded by dependent towns, back to your settlement hierarchy, is D. Again, learners, note the following. Once you're dealing with a section that deals with column A and B, what you should do is look at the terms that are identified and pick up on your keywords. Once you've picked up on your keywords, look at the definitions given, and you can match the terms and definitions that much easier. Studying requires you, in this particular section, to note keywords that help you better understand the term. Moving on to the next question. Question 4. Again, another map, and note the following, that these kinds of questions are generally associated with locating settlements on a map and identifying the site and situational factors influencing the types of settlements. Look carefully at the sketch below and answer the questions as follow. A good idea is to always, before answering any question, identify on the map the key aspects that you can remember from your studying. In this example, you'll note again we have settlements that are represented by farmsteads. In this example, you've got settlement A located around a waterfall gravel pit. Settlement D, which is located along a major railway line. Settlement F, assuming a linear shape along a river. Settlement G tends to have a rectangular shape and an orderly placement of each. Settlement B and C are located along a road, whereas settlement B is closer to the road, settlement C is located on a high-lying area. Let's look at the types of questions given. Name the factors that influence the location of each of these settlements labeled A, B, C, and H. Let's get them down. A, firstly. It is glaring that this particular settlement is a wet point settlement as it is located around the waterfall gravel pit. So settlement A, the factor that influenced it is wet point, which in this case is the example of a water-filled gravel. Looking at the next settlement type, settlement B. We've located settlement B at the foothill of this high-lying area. What is also important is that it leads from a pass onto the road. So settlement B is more of a nucleated linear settlement, influenced by the location of the road and the pass. These are two possible answers that can be given. Moving on to settlement C, you will note that settlement C is located along a high-lying area. Again, in this example, the high-lying areas are generally associated with the slope aspect. So settlement C is a settlement that has been influenced by the aspect of the slope. Further to that, settlement C can also be regarded as a dry point location. What is important for you to do at this stage is to integrate your knowledge using the diagram. The last settlement that we'll identify is settlement H. And if we refer to settlement H is located at the intersection of a railway and a road. Note the following. The railway intersects the road at a T. So this is a T-shaped settlement. And the settlement is influenced by the intersection of the road and railway. It's a T-shaped settlement. Let's move on to the next question. Settlements labeled D, B, and J are nucleated. Let's have a look at those settlements. Settlement J, settlement D, and settlement B. Identify the type of nucleated pattern each of these settlements represents. Let's get down D firstly. Settlement D is located along the railway line. However, it has not assumed a linear shape, although there is a linear feature to it. Rather, it is a random nucleation. The reason we say random is there's no specific order of the settlement, and although there is a linear feature, settlement D has not been influenced by this linear feature. Let's move on to B. Settlement B assumes a linear shape along the road, and therefore we can say that settlement B is linear nucleated. What you should note is the following. The moment a linear feature, for example, linear features are rivers, roads, and railway lines, assumes dwellings or farmsteads in this example along the linear feature, it becomes nucleated in this way. Let's move on to the next. Settlement J. Settlement J is a compound, and in this example, it is located again along the foothills of this high-lying area. Settlement J, nucleated. But what type of nucleation? Rectangular. So in this example, we have various examples of nucleation. However, there are physical and social aspects that have influenced the shapes of these nucleations. Moving on to the next question. State and explain briefly the socio-economic human factors that gave rise to each of the settlements labeled D, B, and J. In this example, settlement D is located along a railway line. So settlement D would be railway line. If we have to explain this further, the accessibility of the railway line provides for transport. Accessible for transport. Let's look at settlement B. Settlement B is located along a pass, and again, the nucleation is created along the road. So in this example, B is the road, and therefore accessible for transport. If we have to look further, the next settlement identified is Settlement J. Settlement J is also located along the road, but what's unique about it is it's located at the intersection of the river and the road. It's a compound, and note there is a plantation, so therefore Settlement J is located at an employment area. It stands to reason that those people living in Settlement J in the compound area would be employed in the plantations. Moving on to the next question. Again, question 4. We are referring to DB and J as nucleated. Identify each of the dispersed settlements represented by the letters F and G. If we look at our diagram, F and G, both settlements display a dispersed pattern, as the question clearly states, but the question requires you to specify what type of dispersion is occurring. Settlement F, correct. It is along a river, and therefore F becomes a linear dispersed. Settlement G, note the regular shape that it is assumed, and note the farmsteads are equally proportioned from each other. In this case, rectangular dispersed, or we can also refer to it as uniform dispersed. Moving on to the next question. State and explain briefly the factor that influenced the morphology, remember that word, also meaning shape, of the settlement label G. When we look at settlement G, we are referring to the shape at which the settlement is located. What is important is that it has displayed a uniform dispersion. When settlements display a uniform dispersion, it is important to note that these uniform dispersed settlements can only occur on flat surfaces. So, my answer to this question would be the gentle gradient. The gentle gradient or flat surface. In this example, that particular factor has influenced the morphology of the settlement. Moving on to the next question. Question 5. Use the figure below to assist the question. Choose a correct term from the list provided that will match each of the statements labeled A to E, respectively. Write only the letter A to E and the selected terms. We've got a host of terms, for example, secondary activities, informal trading, quaternary activities, rural-urban fringe, positive balance of trade, mining, rural settlement, gross national product, dispersed settlement, nucleated settlement, site, break of bulk points, tertiary activities, and green belt. These terms are associated with the diagram represented. Let's look closely. The type of settlement referred to as unifunctional. What we should be looking for is a rural settlement. Note that in this particular diagram, your urban settlements are centrally located, whereas your rural settlements are more spread out. The correct answer for the type of settlement referred to as unifunctional from this is rural. And rural would be A. Pattern associated with a single farmstead. If you look at B, there, a single farmstead. What type of pattern does it display? Correct. It is a dispersed pattern. Zone where rural and urban functions merge. Let's look at your diagram. Note there's your rural and there's your urban. This would have to be the dividing line between these two areas, which is your rural-urban fringe. Let's check if we've got that correct. There's our rural-urban fringe. Where one type of transport is replaced by another. This is represented by D. In this example, if we look at this particular area for D, you'll note that this transport is represented by C and replaced by rail transport. Where one type of transport in a settlement is replaced by another, it's generally referred to as a break of bulk point. Answer D, break of bulk point. And the last one, E, precise land on which a settlement is located. The word precise is also a similar term to describe exact location. So obviously this answer would be E, which refers to the exact piece of land in which a settlement occurs. That was an easy question. And with that in mind, guys, let's take a break. Please enjoy this break. We'll be back shortly. And welcome back after that short break. Continuing with question 6, study the scatter graph and answer the questions that follow. When it comes to these kinds of questions, we should note the following. We need to make a study of the particular graph to determine what kinds of trends are available. In this example, you've got different types of settlements located along a line that is increasing. Note the y-axis represents the total number of shops. In this case, services or goods. Population of settlements on the x-axis. As you move from the center, it increases. Hence, as you move from here, moving up from the hamlet to the villages, to the towns, to the cities, to the capital city, the population as well as the goods and services increases. Let's look at the questions that are asked. What relationship does the graph show? The graph shows, in this case, a relationship between the x and y axis. That simply put means the relationship is between population and number of services. We cannot leave this answer here as the examiners require you to show your understanding of how does this relationship work. What is important is that when this relationship exists in a hamlet, there is a certain number of population to a certain number of services. As you move up, the relationship increases. How do we put that? The population increases as the number of services increases. Note the relationship is displayed by the line separating your y and your x-axis. Moving on to the next question. What is the relationship between the hamlets and villages? If you note, the hamlets have a lower population, whereas the villages have a higher population. In terms of the number of services, the hamlets would have a lower number of services, whereas the villages would have a higher number of services as compared to the hamlets. What is the relationship between the two? Both are rural settlements. Let's move on to the next question. Question 6.3. What is the relationship between villages and cities with regards to population? In this example, you'll note the following. The villages have a lower population and lower number of services as compared to the city, where there are a higher number of services and a higher population. The relationship, the villages have a lower population when compared to the cities. Do you note the following? Your village is a rural settlement, whereas your city is an urban settlement. Moving on to the next question. Which of the settlement types, hamlets, villages, towns, or cities, would be found in the largest numbers? Give a reason for your answer. If we look at our scatter graph, you will note that in terms of numbers, you have the most in hamlets, and as you move up, the numbers decreases to the point where you have one capital city. Let's go back to the question. Which of the settlement types, hamlets, villages, towns, or cities, would be found in the largest numbers? Give a reason for your answer. These dots represent the numbers of settlements. And if we look closely at the dots, the correct answer will be the hamlet. And remember, as you move up, the size decreases. So hamlets occupy the largest size. If we have to put that in, hamlet occupies the largest area. Your key word is area of all settlements. And that would afford you the 2 marks. And there, 2 marks. Moving on. Question 7. Study the diagram below, which shows maps of X, Y, and Z as 3 different settlements in rural areas. A slightly more complicated diagram which suggests to you different contour lines with heights, as well as a key which suggests to you the location of roads and buildings. Let's look at the types of questions asked. 7.1. Write down X, Y, and Z as a list and name each settlement pattern next to the appropriate letter. If we start off with settlement X, you'll note that the settlements are located randomly across this particular diagram. A nice word to describe it is haphazardly or random. So, settlement X would be random dispersed. If we go back to the diagram, note the levels of dispersion that occurs on this diagram along a contour line. The next question, Y. If we look at diagram Y, there are roads located and lead to a central point. And note the roads are from the outwards coming in towards the center. This particular settlement is at the crossroads. So we would say that this settlement is a crossroad. We could also refer to it as a nucleated settlement, as it is formed at the junction of different roads merging together. Let's move on. Settlement Z. When looking at settlement Z, the roads form part of a linear feature that these particular buildings are located. In this example, this particular settlement would be a linear nucleation of buildings. Let's go back to the diagram. Note that buildings are located along the course of this road, therefore making it a linear nucleation. Moving on to the next question. Describe each settlement pattern. Here, the examiners are looking for your ability to use different terms to explain from the diagram what you see. Note in diagram X, we refer to it as, if we can go to the previous page, a random dispersed. What is another way of describing a random dispersed settlement? Term X we could say that this random settlement occurs haphazardly. This is a good way to describe this particular settlement. Settlement Y. When looking at settlement Y, we can describe it as a nucleated settlement as it's converging from different roads and meeting at a crossroad. So to describe it, we would say nucleated. Settlement Z. To describe this particular pattern, we would say linear nucleated. The relationship between the answers you've given in 7.1 and 7.2 are close. What you've got to do is make sure the terminologies you've associated in 7.1 are close to 7.2. Moving on to the next question. Explain why each of these rural settlement patterns may have developed. In this example, when looking closely at diagram X, you'll note the following. As it is random or haphazardly located, these buildings offer no shape or form. This could only be attributed to the way the contour lines are spread out. Note the contour lines are represented with the numbers along the diagram. So my answer for Z, let's make that X, is lack of flat land has resulted in a random dispersed pattern. Moving on. The settlement pattern represented by Y is generally located along the roads networks. These road networks merge to form this particular settlement with all these buildings around it. The convergence of road networks has resulted in a cross-road nucleation. Note the roads merging or converging towards the center, resulting in the nucleated buildings around that settlement. Moving on to settlement Z, if we look closely at settlement Z, it is largely influenced by a main road. This could be a national road as well, where buildings have been located. So, the linear nature of the road has influenced the pattern. Let's make it linear pattern. Moving on to the next question. Mention 2 economic disadvantages associated with settlement Y and 2 economic advantages enjoyed by settlement X. Let's start with settlement Y and look at the economic disadvantages. In settlement Y, the nucleation of this pattern results in all the roads converging together. What happens is you could have traffic congestion in such a settlement. Further economic disadvantages is development. What happens is, as there is a convergence pattern emerging with a crossroad nucleation, development is restricted restricted to the accessible points of the crossroad. Let's look at settlement X and the economic advantages. What are the economic advantages of settlement X? If you look at it, it's having a random dispersed pattern. Development occurs. There is ample space. There is adequate space for further development. Let's go further. What happens here is that you have a situation of settlements occurring randomly. As a result, sharing ideas and decisions influences the occurrence of services. When settlements are located randomly, services like water distribution and water points are located closest to these buildings. These are economic advantages of settlement X and economic disadvantages of settlement Y. Moving on. Question 8. Study the sketch that shows possible settlement sites on the following page and answer the questions that follow. In this example, again, you have a map, a sketch map, which shows you with a key the location of a river, stream, steep slopes located to the north, spot heights, for example, woodlands, example, located to the north of the map, on the high-lying area, as well as marsh areas. Remember, marsh areas reduce the amount of development that can occur in a specific area. Note the first type of question. Differentiate between site and situation. Remember our keywords identified earlier. Site refers to the exact, I'll use another word, precise area on which a settlement is located. Situation, the key word that we refer to is refers to the correct relationship. The key aspects of understanding site and situation. Site refers to the exact or precise area on which a settlement is located, and situation refers to the relationship between the settlements and its surrounding areas. Moving on to the next question. Match each of the following settlements labeled A, B, C, and D, A, B, C, D, and E with one of the following factors. Defense against neighboring tribes. If we have to look at this particular settlements, which would be best? We're looking at A, B, C, D, and E. Let's locate these settlements. Settlement D, settlement B, settlement A, settlement E, and settlement C. Of all these settlements, note that settlement D is located on the highland, which gives it a strategic positioning as opposed to settlement A, B, C, and E. So the correct answer for defense against neighboring tribes would be Settlement D. Settlement D is located on a high-lying land away from the other settlements. Availability of a permanent water source. This type of settlement should be located close to a river. Of the settlements identified, A is most well positioned as it is located in a well-drained area. So the correct answer for 822 is A. Close to fuel supply and building materials. Note the following. There's a light woodland and rich soil occurring at settlement B. The correct answer for 823 is B. A bridging point. A bridging point would be the high-lying area close to a high-lying and a low-lying area. That would be settlement C. Remember dry point, where water serves as a threat. Therefore, settlement E is located in relation to the river represented. Settlement E represents your dry point settlement. Moving on to the next question. Give 2 reasons for A not being an ideal site for a settlement. If we look at the location of A, why is it an unsuitable site for a settlement? It is located along the floodplain. Remember, the floodplain exists on either side of a river. Note, as the examiners are suggesting, it is a well-drained area. Water would serve as a threat for A. If we're looking for 2 reasons, A is located on the flood plain. If we look further to that, it is also located at the confluence. A is located on the confluence of the river system. Referring back to the diagram, note that there is a river that joins as a tributary to the main river. This area here serves as a confluence. Further to that, A is located on the floodplain, and therefore it cannot be safe to live or have a settlement occurring at A. Moving on to the next question. Assume that a nucleated rural settlement develops at G. Let's find location G. The question, state the shape that is most likely to take. Looking at G, we have a situation of a physical feature, in this example, a river. If G were to occur, it would occur close to scrub, light woodlands, and rich soil. This would offer a nucleation pattern of settlements along the river source, which would be suitable for both grazing land as well as accessibility to water. The most likely situation would be a linear nucleation or linear nucleated pattern. Let's move on to question 842. 842, give 2 reasons for your answer. In this example, we've answered that the most probable pattern would be a linear nucleation at settlement G. The reasons for this is the location of the linear feature, which in this case is a river, will influence the shape. Another reason is the location of the woodland or scrub-light woodland, which the examiners are telling you has rich soil. When rich soil occurs, it could be that the rich soil would lead to a nucleation of buildings to support intensive farming. So now, that brings us to the end of the questions. Let's take a closer look at what we've got to know for questions 3 and 4 of your geography exam paper. You should know the following. Question 3 and 4 deal with settlement geography, more specifically, rural and urban settlements. We are dealing with the spatial processes that influence spatial patterns in a settlement. Let's look at hint 1 more closely. Hint 1 refers to the final examination in recapping 20 to 30% of rural questions and the balance being urban settlements. What you should have is a complete overview of the terminology associated with rural settlements. Some of the factors that influence rural settlements is your urban hierarchy. This deals with the classification of settlements according to their functions, size. For example, looking at the particular hint, when you are studying, remember your 20 to 30% of rural settlements as well as the balance of urban settlements must be associated with the definitions and terminology. There is no replacement for making sure that you have a thorough understanding of all the content associated with both sections. What you should also encourage is you drawing flow charts, flow diagrams, or mind maps of the different content associated with rural and urban settlements. Looking at hint 2, expect to be examined on some settlement work in the map work examination. Generally, question 3 involves integration in map work. If I have to repeat and reorganize the content in map work, you're looking at specifically multiple choice questions in question 1. In question 2, you have your calculations. In question 3, your interpretations, and question 4, GIS. Question 3 is generally your analysis and interpretation, where your theory is merged with the map work content. Your ability to identify different types of settlements on a topographical map will afford you the opportunity to be able to answer these types of questions. As you've seen, we've had various types of sketches to elicit the content of settlement geography. It is the discerning geographer who is able to bridge the gap of using a topographical map and integrating it with settlement geography. Remember, you have your key to support the content. So therefore, it becomes easily available to you to identify different types of settlements on a topographical map. You should always be able to still refer to your theory content in a map work paper. Looking at hint 3. Photographs, sketches, maps, advertisements, and statistical data can also be expected in this section. What is encouraged is very topical information based on happenings in our country. Settlement geography tries to integrate your knowledge of the South African landscape and use that knowledge in the theoretical basis that is provided in your grade 12 curriculum. What you should be doing in order to have a better understanding of the content is keeping up to date with newspaper articles, especially on issues of land reform, land restitution, as well as debates around mining, farming, and those factors that influence the way settlements change their shape and form as politics and economics influence change. Hint 4. Make sure you know the key concepts and terminology and are able to apply this knowledge to new situations. In this case, your new situations would be the examiners testing you on the knowledge that you should be having out of your curriculum content. Although the examiners stick strictly with what is in your text, your knowledge of settlement geography must be broad and far-reaching in terms of the current issues and processes that we have existing in our country. Make sure that these key concepts are known to you. There is no substitute for taking the time and ensuring that you have mastered each and every concept in terms of understanding definitions, keywords, and associating these keywords by studying them to define all the concepts taught in settlement geography. And that brings us to the end of this session of geography. I hope you've enjoyed and are able to better understand the integration of map work and settlement geography in this content. Thank you guys, and see you soon.